Hello and welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley, your host for the next stimulating Goldster Inside Story Hour, where we are going to talk spying, community, bookselling, literature, royalty, all within a wild, windswept town on the East Anglian coast with fishing boats, squawking seagulls, and a bookshop owned by today's magnificent guests, the heart of the community. Now, in movies and fiction, bookshops have long been a place of romance and intrigue. But what is it really like to run one? How do you match your books to the character of the community? How do you compete against Amazon, Waterstones, the big boys? And what lengths do you go to make sure that your customers get the books they order? Our guests have been in it for a quarter of a century. And when we're told that everything is dumbing down, they have expanded the shop itself and founded the now famous Aldborough Literary Festival with writers such as the late Harold Pinter, A.S. Bide, as well as 2 Nobel Prize winners. This year's has just finished, which might be why our guest has such a glamorously rugged look, or it may be the weather outside. It's very windy, I think, today there. They've also put together this anthology of brilliant writing, A Suffolk Garland, with Ralph Fiennes, India Knight, Craig Brown, and there's a Ed Sheeran somewhere in there as well, that great rock star from Framlingham in Suffolk. It is beautifully produced, and I have a competition question in a moment. The one who gets it right will win this copy as a Goldster Inside Story prize. If 2 get it right, we'll work out who gets it. And on that note, welcome to Goldster Inside Story, the owners of the Aldborough Bookshop, John and Mary James.
Hello.
Hello.
It's great to see you. Where are you exactly in your bookshop at the moment?
I was sitting in the office, our rather freezing cold office, hence the scarf. Yeah, we're sitting in the back office.
But the romance, we do have one nice story as we introduced 2 widowers to each other in the office, and they're now happily married. And in their wedding speech, they described how they first met in our very untidy office, which I thought was a very unkind way of thanking us for the
there's a whole conversation to come out of that story alone. But are you able to pick up your laptop and show us the shop and then tell us at the same time sort of who's buying what?
I'll take you around. Hang on.
Yes. So that's the office we're looking at there.
Office. Now we're moving into the sort of stationery section past the cards. We have lots of cards on spinners.
Yes.
And then we move further in, and then just past the local table. Hang on, how are we doing that? Local, yeah. Some of the
when you say local, that's the local books for Suffolk, is it?
Suffolk books, all that kind of stuff. And
so
then
nice new, a lovely edition of Adrian Bell just been republished.
And then we move towards the till, where we've got our assistant Isabel and Harriet here.
Hello, Isabel. Say hello to the Goldster members.
So it's Harriet there. Harriet's now disappearing. And then Isabel has started hiding. Now I think I can see her there. So that's it. They're all a bit camera shy, but let's not worry too much. And then we'll go into the fiction section. We'll go towards the thriller section, thinking about it, because there's rather an important book.
You've got my book and my thriller. That's very kind of you, John. But what sells more, fiction or non-fiction?
Yeah, you can see in there what sells. Well, I suppose we do equal amount of fiction and non-fiction, but bestsellers are sort of here. And what we've been doing quite well with is recently is lessons in chemistry.
Lessons in chemistry. Oh, okay, that was a Goldster book club. Yes, Lucinda Hawksley, my co-host, did that last month. So we're both on the nail there, as it were.
I'm reading to them.
And what we're seeing, how many books do you stock at any one time, or do you have?
I think we've got something like 8,000, 9,000, something.
8,000 or 9,000 books. Goodness.
I think the theory that we have, and if you describe each book as a line, we have more lines than Tesco's have. They'll have less than, so because every book is a line.
Yeah, so you mean lots of different genres and things like that, whereas Tesco's you just get the best-selling books, really, don't you?
Well, no, I mean, I was saying best-selling items. The items that we're in Tesco, we're talking about, bleach and that kind of thing, and loo paper or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Jean Joyce, one of our audience members, says lessons in chemistry a great read. So we are definitely on the right button there, as it were. Let's go back to your scruffy office, where full of romance and intrigue. And because there's so many questions that just has come up that just to sort of, I would get you out into the high street to give us pictures of, but describe the community for us. The people that come into your shop. What is Aldborough as a community?
Me. So
Mary,
Aldborough, it's a seaside town, quite windswept, hence our scarves, and on the east coast, and it's a fishing village, but it's also a very popular holiday destination. So it has a lot of visitors, some permanent with houses here and some just visiting or on holiday. But huge amount of changing population, as well as the regulars of, I'd say probably about 3,000 permanent members. But lots of people from all over, and a lot of people have heard of it and they love it and come back and back, which is wonderful, which we love.
There's also,
sorry, John.
I was going to say that a lot of people have come here to retire, so we actually get a more elderly cross section of the community than other places, and that's jolly nice. Actually, that means that you have a whole load of people who have done things in life, and that has made our lives very interesting. And it means that the bookshop, the variety of stuff in the bookshop or books in the bookshop, reflects that.
Yes, and many people describe bookshop as being the heart of the community. Can you tell us in what way, apart from just selling books, you are a magnet of you told us about the widow and widower meeting in your back office.
Just generally, there's really one high street with all the shops, which we're on at one end, and we're opposite the cinema, which is another sort of cultural hub. And we're often a meeting place. We are a destination. People come and stay in the hotels, and then they say we always come here whenever we come. And we have a book club, and we run a festival, which you mentioned earlier. And people are you're very likely to bump into somebody, if you come into the shop and you're browsing, you might well meet somebody, which is really nice because it's always buzzy and busy.
I think we'd always aim to be the heart of the community. I'm not quite sure whether, I would hope that we are, but I mean, that may be a little bit too.
And we're always open. We're open 7 days a week, which is
7 days a week. And I mean, to many people, running a bookshop is sort of living the dream in a way. Like people say they just want to go to the country and run a bookshop or a hotel or something. And you are on a beautiful coastal community. But when you were growing up, did you want to be an astronaut or a train driver or a bookstore owner? John?
I think I wanted to be an academic, actually. It depends what stage of growing up. First of all, I wanted to be a doctor. My father was a doctor. And then I wanted to be an academic. And then a bookshop didn't really come into it. I then became a chartered surveyor. I'm a chartered surveyor by qualification, and I did that for 20 years. So I was buying commercial property.
Yeah.
Then I gave that up in the year 2000 and came here.
So you entered the book trade after being a chartered surveyor for your Mary. What
this is really dull. I always wanted to be a bookseller, and all I've ever really been is a bookseller. And I worked for 15 years as an antiquarian book dealer, selling rare books and manuscripts, first editions of Jane Austen and that sort of thing. And so this is completely different because it's all new books. But so I've now worked 35 years with books, which is fine by me. I'm very happy about that.
Yes. Okay. So I mean, we've got all that. So now we're going to go to our competition, to our audience, and which you've seen the bookshop. You've got an idea of the community. A lot of retired people, professional people, but the summer people coming in. This is it. Prince Harry's book Spare. I've just come back from New York. It was #1 of the New York Times bestsellers list. How many copies did John and Mary sold of Prince Harry's book Spare so far? Is it 1? Is it 1,000? Is it 100,000? Put your answers in the chat, and the winner or winners will get this. We'll work out if there's 2 or 3 winners. The number 18, says Alison. We're coming in already. Brilliant. 2, says Ruth. Mary, you had some comments, didn't you, from some of your customers about whether you should stock it or not?
Yeah, so I send a regular newsletter with offers and events and new books, and I suggested before Christmas that people might like to pre-order their Prince Harry copy. And I've actually just lost the email, but I got a very cross email from one customer saying, "How dare our revered bookshop stock this book?" Which actually I think we can stock anything. So I didn't cancel my order with Penguin.
So I was going to say, interesting, given that in the publishing trade particularly, and Jen, you've got this cancel sensitivity editors and all this sort of thing of what you can and cannot say, and you're being, what you can and cannot stock. Is there any book you wouldn't stock?
Yes, probably. Well, Mein Kampf, I don't think we'd stock.
Right.
We did, funny enough, I mean, as we're talking about it, we did have a customer who asked for an Islamic book, which is quite a well-known text. It turns out to be, well, I think that...
We didn't know that at the time.
No, we didn't know it at the time. It was called Milestones, and it's by a man called Qutb, I think. And I mean, it's a horrid book. It's about radicalization, and it's about how to, I think, probably kill non-Muslims. Okay. The person who was buying it was researching, really, and anyway, we were visited by the police, and the anti-terrorist squad, Suffolk Division, and we were visited twice, but it was a very strange time, and a very strange thing to happen to us. But yeah, no, I think we wouldn't ever stop that, but we got the book from the person for the person, because that's what our job is.
Yes, and that's but it's not a banned book as such, but it rose suspicion as to who was ordering it.
It may have been that. I don't really know. If there is such,
it wasn't banned, but I think the publisher in Birmingham, the bookshop and publisher, was closed down in an anti-terrorist.
That's
and they found an invoice to this small Suffolk bookshop.
We had to give a statement.
Yeah,
we're getting some wonderful answers in, and I'm going to read them out, but lips are sealed as to what it is. Alison says 18. I think we had that. Ruth is 2, Amber is 5, Annem is 3, Sue is 21, Jean Joyce is 50, Paulinska is 59, Trish Ullman 375 copies, Maria 203. Goodness, they keep coming in. Debbie 150. This is an interesting comment from Monique. I remember when working in libraries, we had to keep Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie behind the counter, and customers had to ask for it if they wanted to read it. In other words, you couldn't display it. Is right, Monique? Do you have that with any?
Well, no. I mean,
no. You display all books regardless of.
Sometimes we find they've been moved, and we wonder if a customer has moved them. There's been some which turn up in unusual places, and you think, I wonder how that got
sometimes there. They're hidden. I think, I think people.
That's. I'm going to put another question to you, which is part of the Goldster thing, because I have a Goldster book club coming up at the end of April, I think it is. I'm asking our audience whether they would prefer to discuss Franz Kafka's Metamorphoses or Richard Osman's The Bullet That Missed. That's the two choices I got. But since you were on, more experts, let us know your recommendations of what you want, and also how to buy it. We're going to run through the chat occasionally how to buy any book from John and Mary, wherever you are in the world. And we'll put the links to your suggestions up. Put in the chat what you would like to discuss, and then the winner, if I can remember, we'll get it either Franz Kafka, Metamorphoses, Richard Osman's The Bullet That Missed, and whatever John and Mary's recommendation is that they will give us.
Can I make two recommendations? One is very long and one is very short.
All right.
Okay, so the very long one is one of my favorite books. It's a historical novel called This Thing of Darkness by Harry Thompson.
Right.
And it's Captain Fitzroy and the Beagle and Darwin, and it's marvelous. And the very short one we read with our bookshop book club last month, and it was very popular, and it's very short, which is always popular with book clubs, is Foster by Claire Keegan, and I'll send you the link.
Okay, or put them in the chat if you can access the chat there. I think Joe might have fixed that up for you. And John, yours?
Mine is Miklos Banfi's The Transylvanian Trilogy, which is that. You can look that, you actually come up in the wrong way. The Transylvanian Trilogy, which is what could be described as the Transylvanian War and Peace.
Okay.
And it's long, it's in 3 volumes, but I thoroughly recommend it. It's full of history, romance, and beautiful descriptions of a time and a place, but really 19th century Transylvania, which is sort of very significant because it's just before the First World War. But it's a beautiful, beautiful book with a lovely, lovely cross-section of society, and at a very strange time. And
okay. So that's the Transylvanian Trilogy. We're going to get those up in the chat soon. Transylvanian Trilogy, or This Thing of Darkness, is Mary's put it in there, by Harry Thompson Foster and Claire Keegan. We're getting a mixed reaction. The Bullet That Missed from Carmel, Franz Kafka from Paulinska, Alison Lester. I love Richard Osman's books, but do they require discussion? Kafka, please, Kafka. So Joe, if you're across this, or if you can keep a copy of this chat so that our democracy, our goals for democracy, can come to the fore here. Given that, this discussion, how do you know what to order? Because there are thousands of books published a week, I think, or a month. And you must take note of who your customers are, what is in the larger Aldborough region, but also the summer and the winter, possibly. You said the holiday makers come in.
Well, if we tell you our secret, then everybody will run a successful bookshop. But it's really easy. We buy books that we think look interesting and good. That's it.
Yeah, and actually what happens is we get visited by reps from the publishing companies, and they show us what's coming up, and we buy on the basis of that. And it's incredibly exciting, actually. I mean, it really is. It's one of those, one looks forward to seeing reps and receiving the books.
And you can buy on any subject. So I actually have sold a couple of books about how to make a dry stone wall, which I think is fascinating. But I've never tried making it, but I like looking at the pictures. But don't you think that's interesting? I mean, I think it's fantastic.
I wonder if that had come from the Clarkson's Farm TV series, because they've got a character in there who does dry stone walls.
They'll be knocked down.
And what about you were talking about local stuff, and we're going to talk in more detail about a new Suffolk Gull in a moment. But are there sort of historical Suffolk books, or East Anglian coastline books, or climate change books about, say, the eroding coastline, or do they not sell? Or
no, very much so. No, and it's a very large part of what we're selling and interested in as well. So So, for instance, I mean, I should think there's a new local author's book out on East Anglian subjects every week, and some of them will be about transport. An academic called Jules Pretty has written a lot of books about the fragility of the ecology of the coast. He wrote a wonderful book called This Luminous Coast.
Yeah.
Who else? And then there's a lot of interest in the sort of rather more nostalgic titles like the Adrian Bell that we showed you on the local table.
Is Adrian Bell the father of Martin Bell?
Yes, absolutely.
And actually, the other interesting, he had a daughter called Anthea Bell, who was a very good translator, who translated Asterix and
Stefan Zweig.
And Stefan Zweig, exactly that.
Okay.
And she was a brilliant, clever woman.
Yeah, so that and he wrote for the East Anglian Press or Bury Free Press or something, I think, didn't he? Adrian, yes.
What happened? I mean, he moved from being a journalist in London and coming and living in the country, and decided to try and make a living as a farmer.
Yes.
And then wrote about it, and it's terribly nostalgic. I mean, it reminds me of of a time that's gone, but absolutely wonderful descriptions of markets in Bury St Edmunds and that kind of thing.
He also invented or developed the first cryptic crossword for the Times.
Oh, okay, that's a brainy person, very brainy person. We've gone over the community and how do you know what to order, but are there always authors that are selling in, say, the non-fiction fiction? So is there always an Agatha Christie in stock, or do you?
Very much so. And then there are trends. So you're choosing whether to have Richard Osman. There's now a lot of cozy geriatric crime books. One of my favorite is The Appeal by Janice Hallett, which came out at the same time as Richard Osman, but didn't get nearly as much attention. I think it's very good.
And what do you say? The reps come to you, and what interests you? Why did Janice Hallett not catapult up like Richard Osman?
I think he has a TV show.
He's on the telly.
And I think that's about it, isn't it?
That's it, is it? So the name recognition is it? Alison Lester says The Appeal is superb. So we have like minds there. Alison, did you tell us whether you wanted Franz Kafka or Richard Osman as the as your book of the month? Kafka. There we go. We've got that. We've got that straight. I want to talk about the lockdown, because that was a time when you had to close the shop. I mean, when you were told that, did you go and look at the bank books and work out what was going to happen? How did you stay afloat?
Very worried, actually. And first of all, I tried to make sure we had money in different bank accounts, because just in case it all went completely pear-shaped, and the banks went bust or something. And then trying to get a bit of cash in, which we put in the safe. I completely over catastrophized in hindsight, but of course then what happened is that the furlough scheme came in, and we could all sort of slightly breathe a sigh of relief that we weren't going to go bust, and the world wasn't going to end there and then.
You kept selling books though, didn't you? Or did you? Yes.
Books, but I tell you what, it was the saddest thing to be in the bookshop without customers.
Yeah.
It was the bookshops need customers, and it needs the interaction and the changing stock, and it was quite hard to get deliveries because some of the publishers hadn't worked out how to get books out, and some were very helpful and kept in touch with us. Others just furloughed their staff, and so we had no one to speak to. So we kind of remembered who helped us in those, certainly in the early days while we were all trying to work out what to do.
Okay.
And then we sent out books. We could only take orders for books. People couldn't come to the door and say, "Have you got War and Peace?" So that technically they had to be pre-ordered. So I don't know how that worked. So we just said, they said, have you got War and Peace? And we counted that as a pre-order.
that was the first lockdown. The second lockdown, we did start doing stuff at the door, but we did a lot of delivery actually, and we were working very hard. So the delivery what would happen is people would email us and say what they wanted. The delivery would come around about 2 o'clock, and then we had about maybe later. We then had to package everything up and run to the post office, who, by the way, were absolutely fantastic during the lockdown. We ran to the post office, and they then posted things to people for us, and with great humor and great sort of courage, actually, because everybody was slightly worried about getting it. And I thought, absolutely outstanding, particularly the woman in Albury. She was just brilliant.
Yeah, and you said you did deliveries. Did you actually take them to people's houses and leave them socially distanced?
We drive around for an hour or two in the evenings. It was fascinating. We went down tracks. I've always wondered what happened down that road. We found out what happened down every lane, and people give you such bad directions to their house. They say turn left at the tree, and you think there are a lot of trees. Which one?
But the thing that was really nice actually is that you occasionally see people, you'd get an enormous welcome. They were so pleased to see you. And it was sweet.
At a distance.
Yeah, at a distance. But it was so nice. And you'll just leave the package in a place, and sometimes they'd wait 3 days before they looked at it. Yeah. They're all a bit about infection off surfaces at that stage.
But the markup on each book can't be that high. So, by the time you've spent the time and the petrol and everything, you would be losing on that. But that was to keep your local customer base, was it?
And we had both our sons living at home and working from home in their jobs. They'd come home, so they didn't want us at home except to cook meals in the evening. So
yes, and we didn't much really want to be with them either. Much less.
They'd taken over a room for their Zoom business meetings, so they didn't really want us there. So we had to come to the bookshop, really.
Yeah. We had a couple of weeks back. We had a husband and wife team, Ryan and Christina Hillsberg, who'd written a book. They were both former CIA agents who had written a book about how they take their CIA skills to good parenting. And I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked them: is how do you divide up the work? Do you both do the same, or do you do it on a time rota, or does one take out the rubbish and the other fix the light bulbs?
Well, my wife is very sexist about things like fixing light bulbs and taking out rubbish, so I have to do all of that.
And what do you do, Mary?
We worked together 23. We've just passed our 23rd anniversary, and we still have vicious rows about how many copies of a book to order, and the reps sit there, wait while we slug it out, 10 copies or 20 or whatever.
Yeah, I usually go for 1s and 2s. Mary goes for 10s and 20s, so you can see how the other thing that keeps on happening, the other thing is what books to return. I mean, that's a constant sort of source of discussion, argument, So
give us an example of the lessons in chemistry when that first came out. Did you have a vicious row about how many of those to order?
No, because we get given a lot of proofs and early review copies by the publishers, and I read it on a train journey in one go up to Cumbria and loved it. So I'm afraid I ordered a lot of the hardback, and then we sold over hundreds. We sold hundreds.
Oh, good.
Just got the lovely paperback in now.
Yes. Talking of that you sold 100, we are still running the competition or the guessing game as to how many copies of Spare John and Mary have sold so far. That's Prince Harry's book, which is now #1 of the New York Times bestsellers list, best-selling book of all times, we're told. How many copies were sold from the Albury Bookshop? Just put it in the chat if you haven't put it in already. Monique says, it's also sad to see the libraries I worked at without customers. Yes. Interesting. How long would you keep a book in stock for before you return it if it hasn't sold?
Well, the theory is sort of, 3 months to a year. Then you forget, and then you discover things, then you can't sell them back. That doesn't necessarily matter so much in non-fiction, because I think people are quite interested, books of, but fiction, it does matter. Fiction, things go out of trend very, very fast. Yeah, so it's 3 months to a year, really.
So I think I asked this before, but just a little bit brief, that you always have, say, an Agatha Christie, and do you always have a Tom Clancy in? Do you always have a, I'm thinking of another fiction writer who's very famous. I'll look at my book. Do you always have Hilary Mantel in?
Always have Hilary Mantel. There's some local authors we always have, and they come and make sure we've got them, like Anthony Horowitz lives down the road. We always have Humphrey Hawksley. But
He's really scary.
Yep. We don't want to fall.
That's very kind. Yeah. And so there's a sort of stock, I guess, in fiction and non-fiction that you will always make sure you've got a copy in, and others will come and go according to what you think that the demand is going to be.
Yeah, there's sort of core stock. So in crime, for instance, we'd always have sort of classic crime like P.D. James, and some of whose books were set locally as well.
Weren't they? Yes.
He had a house in Southwold. And there's a very good espionage writer called Edmund Wilson. Have you come across him?
Yes, isn't he from Leiston or somewhere?
Yeah,
that's
but
right.
He's from America originally.
Yes.
And his books are great, and actually they've been picked up by a bigger publisher, and so I think he's beginning to do better, but they're very good, and we always have his books in.
Okay, that's a very. Ada says 50. This is on our competition. I think somebody's come close, but hasn't quite got the number yet. So that's your clue to everybody. I think we've had 480 down to 2, so that is not much of a clue. I want to move on to the festival, because you've just finished it. It's a fantastic, it's on everybody's diary list of literary festivals, and you started it, was it in 2000? So it's been going 2002, began 21 years. What gave you the idea or the impetus, motivation to begin it 20 years ago?
Shall I take that?
Yeah, you take it. I'll see what we say.
We when we bought the bookshop in 2000, friends and relations who'd written books said, would you like me to come and sign books? Come there. And we said yes, and then we had enough that it was a day, and then we met P.D. James. We had lunch with P.D. James, and she said she'd come, so we said thank you. So it was looking quite nice, and we had a really interesting lineup, and we had some advice from helpful local authors like Libby Purvis. And then Alan Bennett rang up. It's a long story, but he rang up and said he'd like to come too. So we said, we think we can fit you in. And so we got off to a really good start with that. It was sort of 2.5 days.
Yeah.
And then once we'd had that stellar lineup the first year, it was easier then to write to people and say, last year we had so-and-so and it didn't go wrong. So will you come this year?
So, and the second year we had Doris Lessing. So we got going quite quickly. I think the key, I think that quite a serious one was, getting Alan Bennett in your first year is sort of almost unheard of. So, and P.D. James, and that's really, with that, off we went.
All I can remember about what Alan Bennett said just before he went on stage, he said, I've got a bit of a cough, so if I start coughing, I'll have to leave the stage. So I just sat waiting for him to cough, and I didn't listen to a word he said, I'm afraid.
But you do this every year. How long does it take you to put it together? For example, are you sending out invitations already for next year, or is next year already booked?
We've already got some bookings for next year of people who've indicated that they've got a book coming out in time and would like to be asked. So we've got a few.
And you mentioned some of the names, but when I looked through, there was a huge list and 2 Nobel Prize winners and that sort of thing. Give us an idea of and some stories about the guests you've had. Any prima donnas that tear up the town?
We did have Rowan Williams came and talked a few years ago.
He definitely didn't tear up the town.
He didn't tear up the town. He said it's a very intellectual book of sort of serious thinking. And he said, referring to his own book as impenetrable. And I said to him afterwards, I don't think you're doing great service to your book sales. And he said, I have to be honest, he said, quite rightly. But I do think publishers, I mean, authors shouldn't describe their own books as impenetrable.
Yes. So he wasn't too good at selling his book.
Not so good at selling.
And
That's
is that, I think somebody asked, and I apologize for not putting it, is that do you take direct requests from authors to appear? I think that was what it was. I could spool back and find out exactly what that question is. But do you have any sort of tips as to how an author should best sell themselves in one of your events?
We have to balance, we try and balance the program very carefully. So what you don't know if you ask to be on is who else is coming and what the rest of the program will be like. So we don't want two crime novelists in a row, not in the same, or two biographers following each other, because you would need it to be very various. So we have science and history, and it's quite difficult to have fiction. It's quite hard to talk for an hour about fiction in an interesting way. So we have to work out how we can do fiction slots.
Well, that's interesting. You mean literary fiction or crime fiction or all fiction?
We've done spy fiction, comic fiction, every sort, but you have to present it in a certain way.
Historic fiction actually works a bit. You can work on a bit longer. I mean, the big problem with it is most fiction, it's about sort of quarter of an hour long. And if you notice on the radio, most when they talk about books and they talk about one book, it's usually about 10 minutes. And so making something like that last an hour, which is what we do, it would witter a bit. So therefore you need an author with a bit of a body of work.
Or a theme.
Or a theme. I think historic fiction is slightly different because you can start talking about, what was happening at the time in the place and all that kind of thing.
Yes, no, that's interesting, because at Goldster we say, well, it's nice to have a book, but we also need a backstory, or we need a story of the author. And you use that exact phrase, the wider body of work that they had. The thing is that when when you've got that, that's a sort of concentrated weekend of discussion, isn't it? So
usually the authors then come to each other's talks, and so then they perhaps interact or refer to the talks, and sometimes a theme develops, whether it's whatever it is, of historical theme or country or whatever, and it sort of gives a nice unity to the whole weekend.
So what theme developed in the last one that you did earlier this month?
It's mostly about Ukraine.
It was really Ukraine, and we started off with Orlando Figes talking about the history of Russia in his book, The Story of Russia, which is a very, very good book, and which was absolutely fascinating. Then we had Jeremy Bowen talking about, he was talking about his book, Middle East, but inevitably we went back to Ukraine. And then lastly, we had Lawrence Friedman talking about Ukraine from a military history point of view. Both Figes and Bowen were slightly pessimistic about how long it's going to last and how the Russians are probably, can just put lots and lots of men in and it just carry on forever. Friedman, the historian, was a little bit more optimistic, sort of suggesting that it may that the Russian effort may implode, but who knows? Anyway, that was a theme. That was a constant theme. The other thing that happens, which I think is which is very interesting, is invariably the talks that people don't necessarily think of as being of great interest turn out to be absolutely outstanding, and people are constantly surprised. I'd say it's always the exception. I mean, without fail, there's always something absolutely brilliant. So this year we had
I think the scientist called Thomas Halliday, who's written a book called Other Lands, which has just come out in paperback,
right,
which is about deep time. It's beautiful lyrical descriptions of what the world was like, with darkness and waterfalls and emerging land creatures, coming out of the slime.
So he's a paleobiologist.
Biologist.
So
And a lot of people thought, oh, I'm not sure about paleobiology. And everybody who came out of the talk said, my God, that was astounding. And he writes beautifully. It was astonishingly popular, that one. And that was very nice and surprising. We like that.
It's incredible. I think there was somebody who went a couple of years back, and it was Charles Spencer, I think she said, completely knocked everybody out, and they totally unexpected, but he was absolutely brilliant.
Well, the thing about him is he just talks without any notes at all.
Yes.
He just walks onto the stage and just tells you the story. And I remember AJP Taylor, the historian, used to do it on telly. I mean, he used to just talk. And actually, Charles Spencer can do it. And he's very, very clever. His books are absolutely brilliant. They're sort of,
he calls them narrative history.
Yeah, and it's so exciting.
Really good read.
And it comes across, that he's done all this research, and it comes across, and they're always fascinating little bits of detail that are just, mesmerizing.
Yeah, I think that is. Now I've just put in the chat, everybody, the links to buy some books directly from the Aldborough Bookshop. We usually put in Amazon, but we're going. And John and Mary will get those books to you if you want them as soon as it's possible. Probably not
the paleobiologist as well.
Ah, yes.
Well, when you mention Amazon, I think it's like Peter Pan. Another bookseller dies.
Yes, and how do you compete, as I'll say, with Amazon, Waterstones, and these big? Is it a competition, or do you offer the quality, the personal service that they don't offer?
We do offer personal service, and actually, when you look on Amazon, if you look at your personal recommendations, they bear no relation to the book you bought. So there's all that kind of stuff. I mean, to be frank, what we really want is for everybody. I mean, a lot of people use Amazon, that's fine, but what we'd like to be involved is in their book selling habit. And go and talk to a local bookseller, and yes. Especially not in a chain, but go and talk to them, and you'll find out, they'll try and work you out, and they'll try and work out what's interesting for you. So that's really the advantage.
That, you can't really browse very easily online.
No.
And you go into a bookshop and you want a book to read next, but you don't know what to read, and you really do need to. It's the unexpected that's what we hope you'll find. Something you didn't know that you didn't know was there.
Yes, that's Geeta. I'm not quite sure what you need to do, but we can do anything you ask because this is Goldster. But which numbers do you want us to retype in? And we'll do that. But to John and Mary Soul, signed copies of your books, Humphrey. Of course they will, if I pop in and sign them.
Would you like a nice anecdote from behind the scenes at the literary festival?
Yes.
So just quickly, a few years ago, we had Edmund de Waal came to talk about his book called The White Road about porcelain. And in the audience, while he was talking, he handed round shards of 2,000-year-old Chinese porcelain. Broken shards. Yeah. And at the end, he asked for them back. And I took him to the green room to get his rucksack. And the next speaker was David Nicholls, the novelist, was waiting to go on. And David said to Edmund, "What's the crowd like?" And Edmund said, "They're really tough. They're really tough. Look." And he held up the shards. He said, "This was whole when I went out there."
But actually, they would be really, really tough or knowledgeable, wouldn't they? They wouldn't be a compliant crowd.
Good questions.
We get very good questions.
Yeah. And I want to move on because we are running out of time, onto Suffolk Garland. Now this is, firstly, it's beautifully produced. It's got some very big names in there, but you compiled this anthology. What gave you the idea for it, and who's in there, and what are they writing about?
Yeah, you start.
So the Jubilee year, the Lord Lieutenant of Suffolk, Claire Euston, had the idea of having a festival of Suffolk. There was a festival of Britain, which sort of didn't really happen, did it? But it did happen in Suffolk. And one of the ideas was to have a book to celebrate all that's best about Suffolk. And we were very lucky. We were asked to set about this. So this was this was a year ago, over a year ago.
Okay.
And we wanted to widen the editorial team. So we asked a friend of ours called Dan Franklin, who just retired as editor at Jonathan Cape at Random House. And his wife was so pleased when we asked him, because she said she wasn't sure what he was going to do now he'd retired. And then another friend, and she edits, she makes the programme Private Passions on BBC Radio 3. So she's very good at asking questions and, filleting themes. And the four of us set about it. And we wanted it to be thoroughly up to date. So it's got a screen grab from a WhatsApp of the Felix Stowe. It's got a Instagram photographer who's fantastic. We've got Ed Sheeran's lyrics, and then we've got screenplay from Richard Curtis' film Yesterday, which is set in Suffolk. But we also have the chronicles of an 11th century monk about building the cathedral at Bury St Edmunds. And so, and everything in between, and including, there's a letter from the American colonel who's meant to have seen the UFO landing in the Rendlesham Forest, which is just down the road. So it's got a lot of very unexpected things in.
It's a fun. Is there a theme that runs through it, or is it a sort of potpourri? Would you say?
And there's some very, very nice pieces actually. There's the refugee story. This refugee who came from Rwanda, who's made her home in Suffolk, and that's a lovely thing. And then also the first mayor, black mayor of Ipswich, who came over in Windrush, called Albert Grant, and he wrote a lovely piece about how he'd made his home here. And then also Mayuri Patel, who runs a corner shop in Ipswich, who's came over as a refugee from Uganda and has made a life for her children and her husband.
Both her daughters are now doctors.
Both her daughters are now doctors, and it just a lovely appreciation of being here, and just just really lovely and happy stories.
And let's talk about within that, because I know there's a piece in there about Benjamin Britten and the Snape maltings and the music festival that he started long before your literary festival. Is that a key part of Suffolk culture, would you say?
Yes, and certainly here in Albury,
well
on the coast.
Yeah, it's very well covered, and I think it is. But we wanted to go a little bit. There's so much on Benjamin Britten, especially here, that actually we wanted to sort of make it a bit wider. And there's so much actually other cultural life in Suffolk, and in Middle Suffolk and West Suffolk, and all sorts of other. Another very interesting part of this particular part of the world is racing. Newmarket, and
yes, of course, yeah.
And with that, paintings of horses and how. And why racing started at Newmarket, and there's a piece by Brough Scott on that, and then a description of an auction of a bloodstock of a auction of stallions, and that's all. But anyway, we got all that in.
We only let one piece about Benjamin Britten in because, as Johnny says, it's so well covered, and we felt that there were other things in Suffolk that needed talking.
And the other curiosity is an author who interviewed me when I was a little boy, came to stay with my father in West Suffolk, who died recently, Ronnie Blythe, who did Aikenfield.
Yes.
Is he in there at all?
Yes.
Very much so. We and again, we didn't include a bit from Aikenfield. We included a bit from his marvelous book called A Time by the Sea, which is more set round here, and in this medieval oak hunting forest called Staverton Thicks. And he describes the Queen of France having a picnic there, and she would have been the sister of Henry VIII, who had been Queen of France and then married the Duke of Suffolk. And we rang and we asked his permission to use the piece, and he remembered it, and his carer read that piece to him again that evening, and he said, which was very nice, that we had his blessing for the book. And he was also the very first speaker at our very first literary festival.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, absolutely. Now I'm going to ask you a question about this, given our competition, because we're going to reveal how many copies of Harry's book Spare that you've sold so far. Have you sold more or less copies of this than Harry's book?
More.
More.
And it's edition sold out, and we've had to reprint, and all the profits from the Garland, not the Spare, all the profits from the Suffolk Garland have gone to Suffolk charities, and it's so far raised £10,000 for Suffolk charities, as well as free copies to all the libraries and secondary schools in Suffolk.
Oh,
and we've another 1,000 copies, so there'll be more money for charity from that.
Yeah, when we run it through, when it's actually gone through, we hope we'll raise something like £20,000 for Suffolk charities. So that will be, that's quite an achievement.
That is brilliant. So whoever wins this will be a contributor to a Suffolk charity, and you can also buy a copy if from the website, which is sort of up and down in the chat there. I want to ask you one more question before we go to the promos and the end, is that you mentioned P.D. James. What other well-known authors, fiction authors, write about the area that we're talking about? And
one of the best books is The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald, the novelist. The Bookshop, she actually worked in a bookshop in Southwold, but it's very much set in a place like Southwold or Aldborough, but very specifically. And then there's a very famous children's book called Orlando the Marmalade Cat by Kathleen Hale, and that we always have that in stock. It's a wonderful huge children's book about this cat who comes on holiday to Aldborough. The book called Owlbarrow.
Yeah.
In the book, he brings his wife Grace and his 3 little kittens, and they sit on the beach in deck chairs. It's very nice.
And has there been a breakthrough non-fiction book, the equivalent to, say, Tim Marshall's, Prisoners of Geography, that's about Suffolk?
Well, I think Ronnie Blythe is really our best-selling local
about
author.
Suffolk. I suppose Robert Macfarlane has set some of his books in Suffolk. So
the Wild Places. There's a very good chapter on Orford Ness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, so, I mean, and that I suppose that might have been a breakthrough book. What else? Waterlog by Roger Deakin.
About wild swimming before it was called wild.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Can you wait there for a few minutes whilst I tell our wonderful audience what we have coming up, and then we're going to reveal the competition and what we're going to have as our next book of the month. Tomorrow, March 17th, we go from cozy Suffolk to the deception and intrigue of Jack Barsky and his deep undercover, My Secret Life and Tangled Alliances as a KGB Spy in America. Yes, you will meet a spy who worked for the Russian KGB and lived undercover with his wife and children in America, giving secrets to Moscow until he was eventually found out. And then next Tuesday, we have a special live event at the beautiful Riverstone Theatre on the banks of the Thames, where my guest will be none other than my co-host Lucinda, on the struggle that she had in researching her biography, Princess Louise, the 6th child of Victoria and Albert. It's also a chance to meet Goldster members in person, so feel free to ask us or tell us anything. Lucinda is, as many of you know, the great-great-great-granddaughter of Charles Dickens, and we share a surname, so I tag myself as a Dickens relative. I don't know whether that's true or not. Lucinda, March 23rd, is with Emma Burstall and her latest, The House on Rockaway Beach. Now, I know the Rockaways quite well. It's a peninsula in the New York City borough of Queens, has miles of sandy beaches, a stone's throw away from the bright lights of Manhattan, and the perfect backdrop for intrigue, mystery, and action. And March 24th, Lucinda again, Anna Domingo, Breaking the Marfa Chain, takes the reader back to the 19th century. 2 sisters are captured and sold separately into slavery. They end up in 2 different countries with opposite slavery laws. That is a fascinating read. And Lucinda, March 28th, is with our adventurous and wonderful co-host Rosie Stancer, who's been walking the Sinai Desert. You might have heard her last week when we did a piece from there with Bedou tribes and camels. She's researching climate change. She'll be back in Somerset to tell us all. And then March 30th, I am with Peter Tonkin, a new series by acclaimed historical novelist, which brings us to the heart of Elizabethan intrigue, power struggles and local colour. Actually, that is going to be Lucinda, because I'm going to be in Asia on March 30th, but it is Peter Tonkin. Queen Elizabeth's court in its twilight years with plots to unseat the monarchy. And then March 31st, Lucinda with Book of the Month, Hazel Pryor's Away with the Penguins. 85-year-old Veronica McGreedy has a fervent desire to travel to the ends of the earth to see penguins. So if you haven't already bought it, get a copy from the Aldborough Bookshop and read it. And if you're already in Antarctica, John and Mary will send you a copy, but it might take a few days to get there. So, and now, are you stocking any of those books? Any of those ring a bell with you?
Oh, yes. So Away with the Penguins has done very well with us. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's brilliant. And I've got Jack Barsky tomorrow, who's a Russian spy that lived in America. You've got a lot of spies in Aldborough, haven't you? Yeah. Retired ones?
Retired ones. In fact, probably not our predecessor, but one had been a spy in Beirut. The ex-head of MI6, Dick Franks, lived in Aldborough, who was watched jumping over his hedge when the press suddenly turned.
Oh my goodness!
During Spycatcher in the early late 70s, early 80s, something. Yes. And then there's a chap. I mean, a lot of them had trouble with Philby. So Northrop, who lived at the golf club, had all his agents picked up and shot, largely due to Kim Philby. So yeah, I know Aldborough has a big connection with MI6.
And we got to know John le Carré because he came here, and our bookshop features slightly in one of his novels, called his last posthumous novel called Silverview.
Oh really? Okay, so you get a cameo role.
Yeah,
he came to see us twice. We're mentioned in his letters too. And we advised him on, being a bookshop, and that was absolutely fascinating, actually.
That's now we have to reveal our competition. I think somebody got very close, but not quite there. How many copies of Prince Harry's book Spare did you sell?
Do you want the answer now?
Yes, we want the answer on the nail.
Yes.
I thought I'd better just check. 13.
13. I'm going to spool back through the chat to see.
15,
here we go. 150, 203, 375. Trish, Alison had 18, and I think we had 17. Kathy had 17. So I think we're going to have Kathy as the winner of that. So Kathy, if you're still with us, send Joe or the concierge at goldster.co.uk your address, and you will have a new Suffolk garland. And if I drop by the Aldborough Bookshop, I'll get John and Mary to sign it, and we'll send it to you from there. That is absolutely brilliant there. Now, one final thought before we go. You mentioned many of your customers, are retired in that. What does reading or interest in books, how can that help people as they move to later age?
Well, you're never alone if you've got a book. It's the most important thing, don't you think?
I think it's probably, and you're never alone. What else? I mean, just keeping your the mind occupied, and with interesting thoughts, and keeping in touch with what's going on in the world. And trying to think what else.
So if you've met somebody who's read a book that you like we've had comments about lessons in chemistry or things, you feel like your mind's met somebody and you feel like you've got another friend. It's very nice.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for that. We've got some. Kathy is still with us. She thanks us for the book. great Kathy. Not sure if you're in London, but if you can make it to the Riverstone thing next Tuesday, I can hand it over to you. And anybody that wants to, I'm not sure if it's sold out or not, but let me know and we'll get you in somehow. Monique, really interesting. Thank you. If I visit, I'll visit if I'm in order. Great guests, love bookshops, and Amber send lots of emojis through. That's it. We are over time by 1 minute, which is dreadful, but that's it. Thank you. Time's winged chariot is upon us. What a fun-filled hour you have given us from the East Anglian coast, taking us deep inside the book trade. And thank you for joining in with your questions, your comments, and your guesses. What good fun they'd have. Maria says, thank you everyone for such a lovely, warm chat. Yes, it was. Until tomorrow, when I'm with the KGB spy, Jack Barsky, stay curious, stay involved, stay book buying, stay safe, and of course, stay Goldster. Thank you, John and Mary, for being such fantastic guests.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And may you sell 1,000 books in the next hour, I'm saying. But thank you. Bye.